Next, I'd like to welcome Sesh. Sesh is a serial entrepreneur who says creating startups is the only way to nirvana. He's done it many times, and when I asked him to give a talk in front of you, he said, "Oh, it's simple. Everyone in the room can do this," and he's going to explain to us and tell us the way how to start up and be extremely successful. Sesh is the CEO and founder of Zetata. Sesh has significant experience in internet technologies and a well-known database and is a well-known database and information retrieval researcher. He has spent the initial years of his life in academia and research, first in IIT Mumbai and then at Bell Labs. Subsequently, Sesh returned to India as the founding CEO of Strand Genomics. He's also the founding CTO. He was also the founding CTO of Yahoo India and founding CTO of Cosmix, which was acquired by Walmart Labs. Sesh also runs Voltel, a tech-savvy company which is focused on emerging technologies and building out the next generation software. Welcome, Sesh.
Thanks, Vinita. Can you hear me there? Good. So yeah, my talk is, I think we have had some very eloquent and passionate speakers talk about what you can do with big data, right? So lots of great ideas. So mine is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about how you would do this, less about what. I do have my pet what theories, and I might come to that. I do think there are big companies that need to be made in this space, and I'll allude to that, but a little bit more on the technology side, a little bit more on the how part, right? So let's get on with how you would build a big data company. So, sorry, I need the, okay. Yeah. Oops, I'm not sure you can read this, but anyway. So before big data, I guess people used to make decisions. I call this a focus group of one syndrome, right? So I don't care what the data says, but my son thought, blah, right? So this is how people used to make decisions. And then you don't want to get here, where you're taking all your time, and there are all sorts of concept tests, and whatever internet panels, and you're running all this complicated stuff. And by the time you're ready to make a decision, you're ready to retire, right? So how do you sort of somehow cleverly come to the right balance? So let's talk about that, and how you would build the kind of products that we have talked about, and we'll talk about a few of those. So yeah, so I mean, I think these are some what I call axioms of building a big data company, right? So how do you sort of think about big data? The first thing is anything you do, make sure you measure. So it's called measure, measure, measure. So which is, I mean, this is true of any startup, right? Anything in life, in my opinion, but any startup. You want to create a hypothesis, you want to create a metric to determine if that hypothesis is right, you want to build a solution that can be measured, and you want to iterate. So you made a decision, you had a hypothesis, you tested it, it didn't work, okay, change it, iterate, change it, iterate. If you cannot measure something, you cannot improve it. That's fundamental. So measurement is fundamental to creating anything of value, I mean, at some level. So any company that's based on data needs to have measurement sort of a focus, right? The second thing to understand is your data is only as good as what you put in. So you put in garbage, you'll get out garbage. You should read that what Calvin says there. It's very funny. So I'm filling out, I'll read this out for those who are, I'm filling out a reader survey for Chewing Magazine. See, they asked me how much money I spend on gum each week. So I wrote $500 for my age. I put 43 for my age. And then they asked me what my favorite flavor is. It's garlic and curry. And this magazine should have some amusing ads soon. Imagine getting an ad out which is targeting this profile, and he says, I love messing with data. So he's corrupted the data. So fundamentally what it's saying is make sure your input data is good, is valid, right? So don't mess with that. And my famous theorem is if you sort of torture the data long enough, they will confess. and they'll confess to anything. Okay? And so you have to be careful. Okay, so this is an interesting point, and many people who do data science don't understand this, or data anything. So what's freaking us out here is that we have found a correlation between owning cats and being struck by lightning. Okay? So this is a correlation somebody found in the data. And, well, I have tons of such correlations that I can talk about. I think there was a sort of somebody looked at the stock market and found that every year, I'm going to make up a model. Every year, if you sort of pick the top 5 stocks or in their PORE ratio and ignore the first and the third one, then you have the best stock picking algorithm that you can come up with, right? So you can fit this data to a model. The question is, does correlation imply causation? So that's the question you have to ask. What does that mean? Well, you can find random correlations in large amount of data, and that doesn't mean anything. Correlation, just because it exists in data, does not imply causation. And that's very important. So let me give you one more example. So here the dog is howling, and then somebody say, oh, he's howling at the moon, whatever, right? So no, he's not howling at the moon. Actually, he's sort of trying to attract the attention of next door neighbor, the dog. Well, this guy has got his tail stuck in the door, and that's why he's howling. So that's just to say that just because you think two things are correlated happening together, it doesn't mean that there's a causation here. This is the best one that I like. So somebody said, I used to think correlation implied causation. Then I took a statistics class. Now I don't. Sounds like the class helped. This one, other thing. Oh, maybe. I won't spoil the joke, but. Okay, so the next big theme I want to talk about is how more data always beats cleverer algorithms. So I'm going to pick up on a point that everybody talked about today, right? But I think there is something very interesting that one can do. So a lot of the examples that people talked about today were about devices, wearable devices. I'm a Fitbit guy. Here I'm wearing a Fitbit. And a lot of it was about what you can do using algorithms, to predict something or the other. So you're measuring your blood pressure, you're measuring your heart rate, you're measuring a bunch of things maybe, and you're trying to predict what can happen with you. But I think the most interesting opportunity here is actually what can you do with the population data? Now imagine that such data is available for everybody, right? So this sensor data is available for each one of you or everybody in the world, and what can one do with it? There are all sorts of interesting correlations and patterns and inferences that you can start making that you just cannot make with one person's data. So you probably understand how many calories are getting burned when you take the usual walking route, because everybody is taking the same walking route, and you can start making inferences along those. So I think the point here being that whenever possible, if you're building a big data company, look for more data. Look how you create new independent sources of data, right? So I think that's, and there are any number of examples. I don't know how many of you know, but when there was this Netflix prize for $1 million that was announced, where you are supposed to predict what people will order next, right? I mean, so that was the big thing. So they have this, based on your past behavior, they want to sort of predict what you'll order next so that they can recommend it to you. It's a recommendation algorithm, right? So people were coming up with all sorts of complicated algorithms to do this. And here was this sort of one team that came and said, look, let me just put the IMDb data, which has things like who's the director, who's the what is the genre, and so on and so forth. That was not available in the original data. And lo and behold, that dramatically changed things. Well, why? I think the best example is what Google did, right, to Alta Vista, and they just added the anchor as a fundamental signal. Anchor text is a fundamental signal, and that changed the whole thing. So there are sort of all sorts of examples where you can throw more data into the mix in some sense, right? And it dramatically changes the equation. So wherever the data comes from. This is a long-winded example of how you can throw more data and how you can learn from more data. And I'll skip this because it sort of gets very technical. So let me move to the next sort of interesting point about what is important to big data, right? And I call that feature engineering. So all of you, any of you who have done data science or data mining or data analytics probably knows that one of the key things when you build a model is to choose the right set of features, right? So you have to say, look, and I'll come to how you do that. But the challenge with getting the right feature is it depends on where you start. So my favorite example is predicting the weather, let's say from the position of atoms, the positions of atoms in the cloud or something like that. So you have some very base level data, such as positions of atoms in the cloud, and you're trying to predict the weather. Is that possible? Well, it's very hard. And the reason it's very hard is because you're missing several layers of abstraction going from positions of atoms to predicting the weather. To some extent, I mean, I think healthcare suffered from this. When what happened was the human genome got sequenced in 2000, 2001, or around that time, 1999 and all that. And people thought now the problem is cracked, right? So we know everything about the humans and we can figure it out. Well, it turned out that nobody understands how to go from genes to what really happens in human pathways. I mean, that model is still a huge void in people's brains. So people don't know how to take just DNA information that's encoded in, ATCG, whatever, right? And go build a complex pathway. How does digestion happen or whatever? How does XYZ protein get expressed? How do you do this? So the key point here being that you should, if you are trying to predict models that, are trying to predict behavior or trying to predict the behavior of systems, complex systems, make sure that you are working at the right level of data. Otherwise, you will have results like this. You don't have a clue about anything. You don't know what is going on. I mean, so it's like a weather prediction. This is just a simple example to drive home this point. I'll just go over this very quickly. Suppose somebody just gave you the latitude and the longitudes, and they said whether something is drivable between these two cities. So this is city 1, latitude, longitude, city 2, latitude, longitude, and is it drivable from city 1 to city 2? And you had this data. Well, you as humans probably know that there is a formula to compute the distance given latitudes and longitudes. How does the computer figure it out? So given this data, how does the computer know or learn the model that there is a formula for a distance, right? So, but if you gave the computer this information, which is, you don't give it the latitude, longitude, you give it the distance, right? Then you can go much farther. So the point here being that make sure you're giving the right piece of information at the right level. If you give this, you have no hope of ever getting it right. You can run your best algorithms. I don't think you're going to be able to get a class predictor that works. If you give this, you have some hope. So just as a sort of an example, right? Let's sort of roll this forward a little bit and think about how big data and humans are going to work together. So I think this is sort of some crystal ball gazing on my part, right? So I I think the best example is chess, actually. How many of you follow chess? I'm sure quite a few followed chess, Anand versus Carlsen, right? So how many of you know that maybe 15, 20 years ago, computers were not able to beat humans? So then Deep Blue came, and I think Kasparov lost to Deep Blue, as you probably know. And that was the first time, by the way. And there was a very famous statement that Kasparov made. He said, when he lost to Deep Blue, well, somebody asked him, do you think computers can beat humans now? Kasparov said, well, is it a match or a whole set of games? So his point was that was just a fluke, and he thought he could beat the computer. Over time, it's been established that, the machines have gotten better and better, but the intuition that humans have are something that computers don't, and they're irreplaceable. And when you put them together, actually, it's very powerful. So I think the human-machine interaction is super important. So the aha moment, as I call it, and you can go back to the previous slides, right? The aha moment was when you're given lat long, the computer could not deduce the distance formula, but you could sort of see that there was a distance formula there, and you put it in there. So the aha moment, the strategy comes from you, but what you are very poor at is number crunching. I mean, you can't crunch numbers at the speed that computers can. So how do you put these two together? I think it's a very, to me, that's sort of the most interesting next steps for computing technology, at least. In particular, I think I call this extrinsic programming. So people today instruct computers what to do, very, very specifically. Explicit instructions are the norm. I think you're going to start seeing implicit instructions. So computers starting to make models. I think the most recent one that I've seen or heard is a robo that actually tries to learn the shape of a hole. It's actually transferring something and putting things into a hole, and it's actually started learning how to do things based on the shapes of the hole. So it's sort of becoming smarter. It's not just following instructions. It's forming a better model of things. So I think that you'll start seeing this happen. So when you do big data, make sure that you use machines indiscriminately for the things that they're supposed to do, but the aha has to come from you. I think there's only so much you can get from computers. So if you're not sort of down in the details on top of the data, I don't think the aha moments are going to come. So you'll be disappointed if you just say, hey, I have a lot of data, here is machine learning, here is Hadoop, whatever your favorite technologies, all the buzzwords you saw, you just put it in there, nothing is going to happen, only disappointment. So you've got to get in the entrails of the system and help the computer along in some sense. I think outliers are very interesting. Anytime you deal with big data, outliers are very interesting. So this is a case where outliers are not interesting, and I'll sort of omit, except I think the cartoon sort of explains it. She asked, why did he exclude all those responses? And he says, well, we define outlier as someone who doesn't like our program. So by definition, it was eliminated. But I'll sort of ignore this, but let's talk about where it's very interesting, right? So my personal thesis is average in anything is very boring, or average in everything is very boring, right? You've got to be outstanding in something. You've got to be so good that they can't ignore you. By the way, there's a very good book by the same title, which you should read. Be so good that they can't ignore you. So outliers along some dimension, right? They always have useful and interesting information. Whether you're combining multiple variables to come up with one global rank as you would in search, for example, or job interviews. I mean, how do you recruit people? I mean, at least, how do I recruit people? I can tell you. So essentially, you're looking for some spark somewhere. Along some dimension, there has to be something so outlandish, so creative that you say, fine. I mean, then I can worry about all the rest. So you have to be an outlier along some dimension, and those are the most interesting sort of spaces, if you will. I actually think this is a very there's a lot of, when Donald Rumsfeld made this comment, there was a lot of uproar about this comment and how silly it was and so on and so forth. I actually think it's one of the most profound comments I've actually encountered. I mean, I don't know whether he meant to say it, whether it was a slip of his tongue. I have no idea what he meant when he said it, right? But I think it's a very profound comment. So, as you probably read, there are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. And unknown unknowns are the things we don't know, we don't know. And I think that's the scary part. And if you can build a big data system that can actually unearth that, I think that's the most interesting, another interesting business that I can think of. And by the way, it's not that hard, okay? I mean, there are businesses where, you know, I mean, any number of things. There are businesses that didn't know that a certain segment of customers were behaving in a certain fashion. I mean, they didn't know that, or so on and so forth. I mean, I can come up with any number of examples where you have been blinded so far. You had no clue this was happening. And I think that's a very, very, very sort of a powerful idea, in my opinion. So I think a lot of people talked about the patient being at the center. I think this is talking about the statistician being in the center, just because it's big data, or a lighter note. So it's a statistician who's coming and giving the diagnosis finally. It's not the doctor, right? So, I'll sort of, that's just a pun on the NoSQL part. So somebody says, this is for all the engineers and geeks in this room. So if you don't have a job and or you're looking for a job, somebody says, are you an expert in SQL? No, it doesn't matter. Then go ahead, write you're an expert in NoSQL. So, thanks.
Sesh, don't go away. I have a question for you. Sesh is a serial entrepreneur and clearly a very successful entrepreneur. He's done it again and again and been, you know. So a question I have is whether you're an outlier. Do you consider yourself an outlier or an entrepreneur who, you know, who you think can find something special, the unknown part of it? Because you said it's not that hard. So I was just trying to find out, you know, every time I ask Sesh, how are you a successful entrepreneur? He says, it's easy, just do it.
That's it. That's the answer still. It's easy, just do it.
You've got to explain it further. You've got to explain it further.
Well, I mean, clearly it takes a lot of hard work. That's for sure. It takes, I mean, I don't know what's, I don't have a simple answer, but I think it's commitment, hard work, and passion. I mean, I guess whatever companies I build it 24 hours, 24/7, and that's all we do. So yeah, I don't have any complex answers. I don't think it's that hard.
Thank you, Sesh.
Yeah.